We begin with the escalating crisis in the Middle East. Iran and Hamas are accusing Israel of assassinating Hamas's top political leader, Ismael Haniyeh. They say Wednesday's airstrike in the Iranian capital, Tehran, will not go unpunished. Hardline protesters took to the streets, vowing revenge and denouncing Israel and the U.S. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not specifically spoken about the attack in Tehran, but says there will be severe consequences for anyone who attacks his nation.
There are challenging days ahead of us. Since the attack in Beirut, threats have been heard from all sides. We are prepared for any scenario and we will stand united and determined against any threat. Israel will exact a heavy price for any aggression against us on any front.
Over to our correspondent Tania Krämer in Jerusalem. Tania, Netanyahu did not speak about an Israeli role in Haniyeh's death. What was his message tonight?
Well, he gave this short statement to the nation just shortly after a very lengthy security cabinet ended. He was speaking there from the military headquarters in Tel Aviv. And as you said, he didn't acknowledge the strike in Tehran, which had killed Hamas political leader Ismael Haniyeh. But he talked about that he had dealt Iran's proxies a crushing blow. But it was essentially a message tonight to the Israeli public to garner support, but also to prepare them. What he said will be challenging days ahead as the country now braces for retaliation by Iran and its proxies following those strikes in Beirut and Tehran. And as we just heard, he said that Israel was facing threats from across the region and that it is ready for any scenario.
We know that Iran has blamed Israel for the strike against Haniyeh. We know that they vowed revenge for the strike. How worried are people in Israel about retaliation?
Well, I think the country is really on high alert, and it's a bit of a strange atmosphere because when you come here during the day, you know, it is as almost like normal life. But when you talk to people in conversations, there is a worry, about the retaliation and what such a retaliation could look like. There have been reports in the media saying that Iran will or might consider to strike directly back at Israel, and there are certain scenarios that are being discussed now. Obviously, it could be a strike that would entail also all of Iran's proxies, like a coordinated attack. Now, we've seen something like this in April when Iran launched drones and missiles at Israel, but this is seen as that it could be much, much more forceful. So we are talking about potentially drones and missiles from Iran, from Lebanon, from Iraq, from Syria, from Yemen, launched at Israel. Of course, there's also the question what the targets will be, whether this will be mainly military targets, will there be civilian targets? It could be that Tel Aviv or Haifa will be hit. So all of this, of course, is on people's mind while people are thinking here, this could be really that the region is on the brink of a wider escalation and the conflict is intensifying.
What does Haniyeh's killing mean for efforts to negotiate a ceasefire in Gaza and to secure the return of the remaining hostages?
Well, I think Ismael Haniyeh was seen as one of the key figures in these negotiations as someone from Hamas abroad. He was involved in those negotiations. So there is a big question mark here about what will happen to these negotiations. We also heard from Qatar, one of the main mediators, alongside Egypt, who has condemned this killing and also questions how this will go forward. And this is, of course, also on the mind of many families here, those who have still their relatives in Gaza. There are over 100 hostages that are still believed to be in Gaza. And of course, there's a lot of worry here. What will happen to them now? Negotiations were kind of stuck. They were continuing. There were just not any result as of yet. But now it seems unlikely that they will start anytime soon.
DW's Tania Krämer in Jerusalem. Thank you. Ismael Haniyeh's killing and the assassination of a top Hezbollah commander have prompted pleas from world leaders for restraint. And while motivation for killing the Hamas leader may stem from the group's October 7th terror attacks in Israel, the animosity toward Haniyeh goes back long before that.
Ismael Haniyeh greets Iran's new president in what would be one of his last meetings. Just hours after attending the president's inauguration, he and his bodyguard were killed in a strike on his residence in Tehran. Haniyeh was the political face of Hamas, the militant Islamist group that carried out the October 7th terror attacks on Israel. Haniyeh had not lived in Gaza for several years, but ran Hamas from Qatar, where he lived in exile. He became the Palestinian Prime Minister in 2006 and continued to rise through Hamas's ranks, eventually becoming its political chief in 2017. Hamas's Gaza leader, Yahya Sinwar, is believed to have been the mastermind of the October 7th attacks, while Haniyeh represented Hamas internationally and moved around the region for diplomatic meetings. He was a key player in negotiations to stop the fighting in Gaza. Some fear his killing will be a major setback to achieving peace in the region. Haniyeh's death came just hours after Israel said it killed senior Hezbollah commander Fuad Shukur in Beirut. The attack also killed at least one woman and 2 children and wounded dozens. Israel says it targeted Shukur in retaliation for a rocket attack on a soccer field in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights that killed 12 children and teenagers. Israel blamed Hezbollah and warned the militant group it would pay a heavy price. Shukur had been one of Hezbollah's leading military figures since it was established by Iran's Revolutionary Guard more than 4 decades ago. After the Israel-Hamas war broke out on October 7th, Shukur was accused by Israel of being behind many of the drone and missile attacks that Hezbollah launched against Israel. Shukur is the most senior Hezbollah commander to be killed since 2016, when Mustafa Badreddin, the group's military commander in Syria, died in an explosion in Damascus. Global leaders fear the deaths of 2 senior leaders of Israel's greatest enemies, when tensions were already at boiling point, could now prompt an all-out regional war.
Alex Vatanka is director of the Iran program at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., and joins me now for more. Alex, welcome to the show. Haniyeh was killed in a high-security guest house of the Revolutionary Guards on a day when security was extra tight because the new Iranian president was being inaugurated. How humiliating is this strike for the regime in Tehran?
Oh, it's really difficult to describe how bad this is. I mean, this could not have been worse. This was a senior member of the so-called Axis of Resistance of Iran, someone that Iran has been cultivating ties with, as we just heard in the segment, since 2017 and earlier than that. And for him to show up in Tehran feeling, well received, and he was, but protected he wasn't. And that is, to your question, Stephen, very humiliating for the Iranian regime. But I might quickly add, this is maybe the most high-profile assassination by Israel in recent memory, but it's not the first. I mean, if you go back a decade and a half, Israel has engaged in many successful sabotage and assassination attempts on Iranian soil, and the Iranian regime, for whatever reason, just can't stop it.
I want to ask in a moment what that humiliation means for a counterattack, but first, do we know how much of the Iranian security apparatus has been infiltrated by Israel?
Obviously, it's impossible to tell in terms of where the problem is. This is a country with over a dozen of intelligence services, many of them that are rivals of one another. Just to give you an example, the Ministry of Intelligence, notorious for its rivalry with the intelligence branch of the Revolutionary Guards. There is sort of competition, jealousy, and so forth. How much of that is in the way of sort of looking for these agents that are essentially working for foreign powers? Mossad, I would have to assume, is one of the best in terms of having infiltrated the Iranian security and intelligence communities, and they have good reasons for it. Here is the Islamic Republic that for 45 years has promised to bring about the end of the state of Israel. So the Israelis, including their intelligence services, are highly motivated to go after Iranian officials, Iranian policies, and doing so by recruiting Iranians. And it looks like they're recruiting Iranians at the highest level of the Iranian regime.
What does that mean psychologically for this Iranian security apparatus and for their ability to achieve their aims when they're so riddled with these kinds of agents, these counter agents?
Right. One of the first things that struck my mind when I was writing about it this morning is, as we're speculating about how quickly and how big Iran's retaliation will be against Israel, and Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has come out and in so many words said there will be a retaliation, and I'm sure there will be a retaliation. But when we question that, how quickly they're going to retaliate and how big they're going to retaliate, this is what we need to keep in mind. The Iranian regime knows is entirely infiltrated. I mean, Mossad was able, I'm assuming Mossad did this, although Israel hasn't taken claim for it. The floor on which Ismael Haniyeh was sleeping at, right? This wasn't an operation done by satellites or listening to phone conversations on mobile phones. This required top-notch human intelligence, meaning you have people in the Iranian regime that are working for the Israelis, providing information. And that means, if I was thinking logically, if I'm Iran, I must then guess or second guess my next steps in terms of what should I do? If I go big against Israel, what do I not know in terms of where else they are infiltrated, what else they could do to stop me in my tracks? And I think that might just create some slower reaction from Iran than a lot of commentators in the West right now are assuming will be the case.
That humiliation that we spoke about earlier, perhaps that need to save face, does it make a response from Iran even more dangerous?
Look, I mean, the Israelis back in April hit the Iranian embassy in Damascus. That was crossing a red line. They killed 2 senior Iranian generals. The Iranians, again, were humiliated. And for the first time, Khamenei publicly came out and said, we have to do something. Now Israel's upped the ante even more. Now Israel has killed a senior member of the Axis of Resistance, someone who had just hours ago met the Iranian supreme leader, had been in the Iranian parliament, met all the senior officials. Israel's message is very clear that it's got a long reach, and they could have killed Khamenei. They could have killed anybody by the looks of things. So, I mean, look, I don't think the Israelis, in terms of their strategy, are sure, from what I can tell, what they want to achieve. But one thing they did want to send in terms of the signal to Iran is, you have come to us by supplying Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and others with missiles and drones that are attacking us. And you've been sitting away 2,000 kilometers thinking you can just watch the show. But guess what? We're now bringing it to you. That seemed to be what the Israeli calculation is also about.
Do you think the chances of containing this conflict, this regional conflict, have dramatically changed in the last 24 hours?
Look, there's more pressure today than it was just a few days ago, no doubt about it. But I always go back to a simple question I'm asking myself as an analyst. When Iran is doing that basic cost-benefit analysis, is a regional war in Iran's interest? And the answer to that question for me is clearly a no. Iran would not benefit from a regional war. A regional war will drag the United States into that conflict and will risk the survival of the Islamic Republic. And that is the most precious of policy they have on their agenda.
All right, that's Alex Vatanka with the Middle East Institute. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Laura Blumenfeld is a Middle East analyst, a best-selling author, and a former senior policy advisor at the U.S. State Department, where she focused on the Middle East peace process. Laura, welcome to the show. 2 of Israel's most senior enemies killed within 24 hours. Can we say to what extent the U.S. government, Israel's biggest ally, was caught off guard?
Well, you know, the United States, whatever they're saying publicly, this is very complicated and challenging for them. We're looking at everything through the prism of a presidential race, and Vice President Harris is running on the theme of freedom versus chaos. Well, their major ally in the Middle East is pretty much a kingdom of chaos right now, with these toppling of, you know, what they call the twin towers of terrorism.
What does this these killings, these two killings, but especially Haniyeh, what could that mean to the attempts to get a ceasefire going in Gaza, something the U.S. government has been very invested in recent months?
Yeah, I mean, it could go either way. On the one hand, you could say this win for Netanyahu kind of gives him that symbolic victory that he needed to make the concessions to reach a ceasefire. And the same can be said of Hamas, that they've kind of been softened down by these military attacks and kind of beaten into submission, which was Netanyahu's approach all along. On the other hand, you could say, no, Hamas is just going to go into lockdown. They've got nothing to lose. As long as they hold those hostages, those souls in their hands, they hold the key cards.
Haniyeh has also been described as a Hamas official who was interested in a ceasefire agreement. How likely is it that his successors will see things in the same way?
I mean, it's interesting strategy, right? Shoot the messenger. I mean, I've known Haniyeh for decades. The last time I spoke to him, he was actually laughing bitterly because he was talking to me about the last time the Israelis had tried to assassinate him. He was sitting at lunch and the ceiling started raining down paint on his head because the Israelis had dropped a 1/4-ton bomb on his house rather than a 1-ton bomb. And so he escaped. There's always a replacement. I can't tell you how many Hamas leaders I've met with, and then months later they were gone. So I don't think that it'll really have a huge impact because Sinwar really was the key interlocutor. He was the decision maker for this deal.
Laura, I want to ask you where we go from here, but first let's listen to what the U.S. Deputy Ambassador to the UN said today at the UN Security Council.
It is best not to speculate on the impact that recent events may have on peace and security in the Middle East. A broader war is neither imminent nor inevitable.
First of all, we know that this killing of Haniyeh was a major event, especially when we compare it against the Hezbollah commander who was killed the night before. Do we have any idea how Iran might respond?
You know, I went to Iran and spoke to the Grand Ayatollah years ago about the concept of retaliation and revenge and how you respond to an injustice. And what he said to me is very, very specific according to Islam. The key, though, about revenge is that the response is often greater than the original offense. And that's why they had this prescription from the elders, one grave opposite one grave. So what would that mean in this case? Does it mean that they would go after a diplomat, an Israeli leader, maybe, you know, a diplomat in Western Europe, for example? Or does it mean they go to the heart of Israel, the way that Israel theoretically, anyway, they haven't acknowledged it yet, but it struck in the heart of Iran, in Tehran? Does that mean an attack on Tel Aviv? I mean, time will tell. It's coming, and it's coming soon.
At the same time, we know that in April, we saw an exchange of direct fire between both countries after Israel targeted an Iranian official in Damascus, but neither side seemed really interested in an escalation. Could we not see something similar here?
Well, there was a very choreographed, carefully choreographed retaliation. Here, there's an extra element, which is humiliation. I mean, Iran was embarrassed. Haniyeh was their guest. He was in their sort of VIP guest house. So I think that there's this element now that where you need to sort of restore the balance of sort of honor, and it's a matter of personal respect. I think that's why the leader of Iran raised the red flag of revenge and said there will be justice and a price must be paid.
All right, Laura Blumenfeld, thank you very much.
Thank you.